Hey, what's up? Wiener Schnitzel. Today I'm going to show you how to make what I think is an exceptional example of it at home, along with some buttery, crispy German-style Spaetzle, some pickled red cabbage, and a mustard cream sauce to turn it into a proper German feast. To get started on this schnitz, I'll need some pork. Specifically, I've got two roughly 1 pound pork tenderloins here. Most traditional German recipes for Wiener Schnitzel will call for veal, but veal is overrated in my opinion. It's not that flavorful, it's ethically questionable, and it's increasingly hard to get in the United States. Most people sub in pork loin for veal, but I prefer tenderloin because it's more tender. Now, I'll cut each tenderloin down into 3 roughly 6-ounce pieces, 175 grams, give or take. And once everything's scaled out, I'll grab a large freezer bag and then load in one of my porks. I'll seal it and push out any excessive air. Then I'll grab a sturdy flat bottom pot, or something close to it in terms of weight and shape, and then I'll pound this pork 50 to 60 times or until it's between 1/8 and 1/4 inch thick. By the way, if you don't eat pork, you could use a boneless, skinless chicken thigh here and pound it in the exact same way. As you can see, this cutlet has gotten pretty freaking flat, and as a result it has a lot more surface area. That's going to translate to a nearly 1-to-1 ratio of crunchy fried breadcrumbs to tender, juicy pork. Ideal for schnitzeling. Now, once I got all 6 pieces of this pork pounded flat, I'm going to season both sides with salt. This is essentially going to be a dry brine, so be generous here. The salt is going to help dissolve some of the tightly bound meat proteins, making it more tender, and help the meat hold on to more of its natural moisture content while cooking. It makes it more juicy, basically. Now, I'm going to stack these up on a plate to save a little bit of space, and then move them over to the fridge to dry brine for 25 to 30 minutes while I sort out the rest of my prep for this feast. Next, let's make the comforting pasta dumpling smash up known as Spaetzle. If you haven't had it before, Spaetzle is soft and chewy like a fresh pasta, but also rich and light like a perfect little gnocchi. They're super good and a really great pairing for fried pork. To make it, I'll drop a medium-high sided pot filled halfway with water onto the stove and bring it up to a boil, and then I'll also grab my stand mixer. Into the bowl of that, I'll combine 350 grams of milk, 1 large egg, 4 large egg yolks, and 7 grams of salt. Then the paddle attachment goes on, and I'll spin this on medium-high for about 15 seconds to get the eggs broken down and get everything all scrambled up. Next, I'll add in 450 grams of all-purpose flour, then I'll spin again on medium-high speed until the batter goes from a dry, crumbly mess into a wet, sticky paste like this. A good way to tell if it has the texture we need to extrude it into a longer teardrop shape is to lift it up and see how it falls off the paddle. As you can see, it's wet enough to flow downwards, but it still holds itself together into a nice long sheet. Now, to properly extrude this batter, we're going to need a little colander. The wide round sides here help hold this above the boiling water, and the small holes on the bottom allow us to squeeze the batter through into nice, pretty Spaetzles. Oh, and make sure you have a dough scraper or something like it as well. Okay, let's make these things. Over at the stove, my water is at a full simmer now, so I'll pop on my colander and then lay in a big dollop of my batter. About a cup's worth, maybe. By the way, this stuff is mega sticky and can gunk you up pretty fast, so stay frosty and just try your best to keep it off your hands. Next, I'll grab the side of the colander with a towel to keep it firmly in place and my hand not burnt, and then I'll use the round side of my dough scraper to push this batter through the holes of the colander. This takes a little getting used to, but the move is essentially just pressing and scraping to push as much batter through as you can. I'll stop scraping and lift out the colander when most of this batter is pushed through. From there, I'll give these little dumpers about 45 to 60 seconds of simmering to make sure they're cooked all the way. After about 45 seconds, I'm going to move these over to a sheet tray to cool down. I'll hit them with a little squirt of olive oil to keep them from sticking to each other, and then I'll head back over to the stove and extrude the rest of this batter. 10 minutes later, or 4 to 5 batches later, I've got all of these through the hot water, and now we've got a whole sheet tray of chewy, rich, comforting Spaetzle. More on these later though when we plate everything up. For now, I'm going to quickly bust out some crunchy, sweet, sour pickled red cabbage and onions to bring some texture and pop to what is going to be a very rich plate of food. For that, I'll start with 1 small head of purple cabbage, and to get it ready for the pot, I'll slice it thinly into long strips like this. 1 medium head should yield me in the ballpark of 500 grams in total, or just about a pound's worth. Once I've got that shredded up, I'm going to grab a white or red onion and do the same thing. I'll shred that crosswise like this into long strips. I'm looking for 100 grams of onion in total. That should be about a half of a large onion. Now, to make the pickling brine, I'll drop a small saucepan over high heat, then add in 400 grams of white distilled vinegar, 400 grams of water, 80 grams of sugar, and 8 grams of salt. I'll bring that up to a hard boil, then add in all of my onions and then my red cabbage. I'll push all that down to make sure it's getting fully submerged, and once the veggies have softened slightly, or 30 seconds to a minute later, I'll pop on a lid and let this pickle cool down off heat for about 15 minutes while I thank Southern New Hampshire University for sponsoring this video. If you feel like maybe you made the wrong academic choices when it comes to college. As somebody who went to a very, very expensive art college and got an audio engineering degree and is currently not using it, let me just say that it's never too late to learn new skills and start fresh. I personally ended up starting fresh by becoming a chef on YouTube, but if you're looking for something that's a little bit more traditional, SNHU is one of the largest accredited nonprofit online degree offerings in the country, with over 200 programs focused on starting or advancing your new career. One program that caught my eye specifically is software engineering, which, by the way, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates will grow by 22% over the next decade. That's a lot of percent. What's really great about SNHU though is that all of their programs are really flexible with no set class time, so that you can do your work whenever or wherever works best for you. And best of all, unlike the college that I went to, SNHU is super affordable. They have some of the lowest online tuition rates in the nation. So if you want to kick off a new career or level up your current one, click the link in my description to get more information on SNHU and check out all of their degree programs. 15 minutes later, I'm going to move it over to a container so that I can fully stop the cooking process by throwing it into a cold fridge. At this point, the cabbage is softened but still quite crispy and is really going to light up the final dish with acidity and texture. While I'm over here, I'll grab my dry brine cutlets because it's time to bread these little MFs. For that, I've got 3 bowls. Into the first 2, I'll add 3 to 4 cups of all-purpose flour. Then into the second, I'll add 6 eggs, or about 1 per cutlet. I'll scramble those real quick, and then into bowl 3, I'll add a lot of panko breadcrumbs, like about 6 cups or maybe 750 to 1,000 grams worth. Then I'll hit that with a generous pinch of salt. By the way, to get this panko ready for the bowl, I added 2 containers worth into my food processor and spun that for about 1 whole minute. Having a slightly more broken down and powdery breadcrumb texture really helps us get even coverage on the cutlet. The smaller particles are going to fill in more of the gaps and as a result give us a coating that sticks better to the meat. Now, using the fork, I'm going to snatch one of my cutlets off the plate and then drop it into the AP flour. I'll give it a quick toss to make sure every little bit is getting fully coated in flour. Any gaps are going to end up not getting breading stuck to them. Then I'll lift it off, shake off any excessive powderiness. Then I'll grab bowl 2, which is my scrambled eggs. In goes my pork, and then same as before, I'll use my fork here to flip this over a few times to get it totally covered with egg. I'll drain off any extra egginess here, then I'll grab my panko. To get this thing coated, I'll swirl the bowl a bit to get some breadcrumbs thrown on top. Then I'll just start covering the cutlet with as many breadcrumbs as I can by hand. I'm basically trying to get every little nook and cranny completely covered with the max amount of panko that's possible. Any exposed raw meat here is going to be a place where meat juiciness can escape, and that's going to both soften the breading, making it less crisp, and make the cutlet dry. Once this pork is sufficiently coated over every square inch, I'll move it over to a sheet tray so that I can bread the other 5. And once I've got all my little porks schnitzeled up with panko like this, I'm going to quickly make a sauce to tie the whole dish together. Today, I'm going to make the Continental Classic mustard cream sauce. For that, I'll drop a saucepan over medium-high heat. Then in goes 50 grams of butter and 50 grams of finely minced shallot. A strong pinch of salt, then I'll saute until the shells are just getting softened and about to take on some color, maybe 30 seconds or so. From there, I'll add in 15 grams of all-purpose flour to make a light roux. I'll stir to combine and fry that for about 30 seconds to a minute. Then to bring in some sweet acidity, I'll add in 125 grams of white wine or sherry. Right away, you can see that roux thickened things up, so in goes 250 grams of chicken stock. I'll bring that all up to a simmer to cook off the raw edge of the white wine. Then in goes 100 grams of heavy cream, 75 grams of grainy mustard, 50 grams of chopped capers, and a little pinch of salt. One more stir to combine, then I'll bring the sauce up to a simmer and reduce it by at least half. This is going to both infuse the sauce with the spicy mustard flavor and concentrate the natural sweetness of the cream and the white wine to balance out the acidity. 10 to 15 minutes later, I've got a beautiful velvety old school mustard sauce. Texturally, it's loose enough to fall off of a spoon, but it's still thick enough to leave a little trail when I push my finger through it. A classic French style nappe. Okay, now it's time to fry. Into a heavy bottom Dutch oven over at the stove, I'll add a dozen or so glugs of canola oil, about 2 quarts worth or 3 inches of oil depth. Then I'll preheat my oven to its lowest setting so that I can keep these schnitzels hot as I fry them off. Once my oil is in the 350 to 360 F range, I'll start frying. So in goes one of my schnitzels, and notice that I'm laying it away from myself to prevent any splashing, and I'm going to cook this for 3 minutes in total. I prefer to cook these one at a time because they're quite large and fitting too, while possible would be cumbersome and would cool down the oil too much, potentially making them soggy with grease. Halfway through, I'll come back with some tongs to flip over schnitzel 1 so the bottom side doesn't get burnt, and then I'll fry for 90 more seconds. And pretty much like clockwork, after 3 minutes at 350F, these Wiener Schnitzels are going to be beautifully golden brown and cooked to just about 150F. Now I'll move this over to a wire rack in my low oven to stay warm, and then I'll drop my second cutlet to fry for another 3 minutes. When I'm getting close to serving time, I'm going to drop a large pan on the other side of my stove and then drop in a few large pads of butter and then a few large grips of my poached Spaetzle from before. This is just about a third of what I cooked earlier and plenty to serve alongside 2 hot schnitzels. After a little hit of salt here, I'll give this a toss to combine and then fry these without moving for about 2 to 3 minutes. I'm looking to get these warmed through and get a little bit of browning on one side. These can get dried out though if you cook them for too long, so after about 2 to 3 minutes, you can see that the final texture is mostly soft on the outside, but there's a little bit of a crisp edge here and there to bring a little texture and some buttery fried flavor. Now to put everything together here on a plate, I'm going to drop a few large spoonfuls of my freshly fried Spaetzle, then a still warm Wiener Schnitzel from the wire rack in the oven. I'll follow that with a strong pinch of that crunchy, tart, sweet pickled cabbage and onions. Finally, a few spoonfuls of that savory, zippy mustard cream sauce. Just a little bit on the edge of the cutlet though, because I don't want to drown it and lose all that hard-earned crispiness, and then I'll throw some on the Spaetzles here to lube those up. And there we go, a classic German feast, but with a little bit more finesse. We've got pillowy, buttery dumpling noodles going on. We've got a sweet, spicy white wine mustard cream sauce to keep things moist. We've got some beautiful pink, purple, crunchy cabbage and onions to give you a break from all that richness. And of course, a perfectly fried, crispy Wiener Schnitzel at the core to bring you all the joy you deserve. This one has the perfect ratio of breading to pork, and as you can see, it's super unctuous and juicy, and it looks great. I hope you try it soon. Let's eat this thing.